Hello, my name is Elena, and I'm a graduate student at the University of South Florida. And my question for Professor is, how can I practically incorporate the gospel into my conversations with my professor and my peers?
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Meet the Prof. I'm Shane Hartley, and my friend Spence Hackney and we're so grateful that you're listening. Thanks for tuning in now. And our goal is simple. It's to encourage Christ-centered conversations on the college campus. And we have a treat of listening to an interview now we did with Dr. Marcus Kilpatrick. And Marcus is a professor of exercise science at the University of South Florida. And we started with trying to get some exercise motivation and advice from him. And then he shares a lot about just the exciting journey. He went from a small town into academia, the value he's learned of vulnerability with his students in order to build a relationship. And I was especially challenged by his leading a Bible study with professors and students together on his campus. So I think you're going to be really encouraged by this interview with him. And before we get started, if you would click on like or subscribe or follow wherever you're listening to this. And without any further ado, we will jump in with our interview with Marcus Kilpatrick. Marcus, I am not only excited to do this because of some I've got to know about you the last couple of years, but you're another Florida State alum like myself. So go Seminoles. And great to have you here with my Chapel Hill friend Spence.
Go Hills.
And I'm very interested to hear about some of your research here about the psychological aspects of exercise, because I'm hoping that'll help me really get motivated in exercising more. Is that what you're talking about? Just how to really psych ourselves up? Is that all of your research?
Yeah, my track record is perfect. If you spend 10 minutes with me, you're going to be set for life for exercising forever. Yep.
You're a pro.
Tell me. Let's do it.
That was a big lie. Over the course of my career, I'm trying to make a dent. It's a big issue, right? We have people that every January will jump into the gym, and by March they're back on the couch. And so I'm making a small dent and really love what I do, just trying to understand motivation and behavior and how we can maybe manipulate exercise in terms of frequencies, durations, intensities, modalities, environments, to try to give people a little bit more of a fighting chance to stick with exercise, because structured exercise is not natural. It's something that's kind of a modern invention. And so it is something people have to work at pretty hard at. And so I have a lot of fun. I'm in my lab today, and
I like it.
We put people on treadmills and bikes, and we have them wearing a mask to measure their oxygen consumption, much like those old Gatorade commercials.
Okay.
So it's a lot of fun, but I don't have any answers really, at least not ones that apply very well to a podcast.
That's what I want is answers. Like, I'm dying to hear this.
Yep. So sorry, that's the only reason we were interviewing you. So
Yeah. Hey, on to the really important stuff. I also saw you're a Princess Bride fan. And so tell us your favorite line from the Princess Bride movie, because you can tell a lot about a man by this question.
I suppose the Inigo Montoya,
You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Yeah, so that's got to be great. But I've indoctrinated my kids into that movie and my wife, so it's a little bit of a tradition. We'll watch that maybe on my birthday every year. It's a lot of fun.
That's epic. I can already tell you're a good father. Like, for me, my kids they've got to watch Nacho Libre, and they've got to watch Monty Python's Holy Grail and be miserable the entire time.
So your bar is pretty high.
And then Princess Bride. That's the holy trinity of movies right there.
I'm sad to say I tried to watch because I couldn't finish it. I thought I was going to appreciate all the Monty Python humor.
Yeah.
And I actually did not. I was disappointed in myself that I couldn't appreciate it more, but maybe I should give it another try.
Well, there are those who can watch Monty Python and enjoy it, and then there's normal people. There's two types of people in the world.
Feel good about yourself, Marcus.
And I'm not one of the normal people, is what I've realized. And now if you can watch Life of Brian, you're really odd, because it's like the drier version of Holy Grail. So that's totally good. So we all have these. Like, and I can think of my most embarrassing moment in college. What was your most embarrassing moment? Let's stick with undergrad, in your undergrad college.
Yeah, so I think embarrassing is also terrifying for me in that I was a small town kid, go to a big state university. I think it was the first time I'd ever been on a bus other than a school bus. The first time I'd ever been on a bus was a campus loop type bus that went around Florida State's campus. And I didn't really know where I was, what I was doing, and wasn't paying attention. And I get off the bus, and without thinking, I step in front of another bus that was coming straight at me. And I remember being yelled at by the bus drivers and presumably, jeered by the other students on the bus. But more than anything, I was just glad to be alive. But that was embarrassing, is one thing that comes to mind. But it was truly terrifying. That's probably, it's among the 1 or 2 or 3 closest times I've probably been to not being alive. It was, so I probably didn't make that as much fun as you wanted, but it was both embarrassing and truly terrifying.
That we can start asking other professors the question of this, what's the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you in college? We've had some answers similar to yours.
That would be up there. Yeah. And so were you from a small town in Florida? Is that how you ended up at Florida State?
For sure. One of those, one caution light.
Yeah.
More farm animals than people. Yeah. Public school graduating class of 27. 27.
All right. You've got me beat. I thought I was from a small town.
I'm going to add to it in terms of the peculiar. The mascot was a hobo.
No, you can't be serious.
Describe this.
The Laurel Hill hobos. And so apparently at the turn of the century, early 1900s, it was a little bit of a staging area for trains and that sort of thing. And so it was known for its hobos. And so somehow when the school was being developed, the people of the community came together and they decided that naming the mascot, the hobos, would be the right move. And so playing basketball in high school, their cheerleaders were cheering out hobo cheers while I'm trying to play defense or make a shot. So anyway, it actually made a list of the 10 most ridiculous or embarrassing mascots. And so it didn't win, but it was on the list.
It was a good recruiting tool. It was in the top 10. It got publicity.
You think about conversations you want to be at. Wouldn't you love to be around the table where there's 4 guys? What do you think when I name the school? The Vikings, the Marauders, the Hobos. And Hobos somehow wins. That guy was a salesman. That guy was persuasive.
Maybe smoking something. Goes about 10 or 15 years ago, there was an effort to change the mascot after I finished school there. And the community said, no, we're sticking with this.
We love the Hobos.
Yeah.
We're committed. So...
Yeah.
Well, I'm picturing you growing up in this environment. So I have a question. You described some online of how you came to Christ. I'm really curious. How would you say you saw God make some real turning points in your life, some changes? Because not a lot changes quickly in a small town. How did you see God work and bring significant changes in your relationship with Him over time?
Yeah. So grew up in a church family, but it was also, again, in the small town that I grew up in. And I grew up in a Methodist church. There was the big Methodist church, which was 10 miles away, which had 100 people in it or less. And they met for church every Sunday morning at like 10 or 11 in the morning. But there were also 2 smaller churches that were out in the woods, which one of mine was. And so I grew up going to church. I think it was the first and third Sundays of every month.
Not every
Sunday. The other
Sunday.
Small church was the second and fourth Sundays of every month. And then on the fifth Sundays, I guess no one out in the woods went to church, was kind of how that went.
Football.
But so it was a revival event at the other country church. When I was about 13 years old is when I would say that's when I accepted Christ. It was a kind of an old school, kind of altar call type of a situation. But I don't remember feeling pressured or guilted or anything. It really felt like that was what God was calling me in that moment. And some good things happened over the next few years, but it really wasn't until I went away to university at Florida State and got really connected into the Methodist campus ministry, the Wesley Foundation, made a great connection with the pastor there. And that's when God started working. So I know that's different than a lot of stories for coming to faith and walking away from faith, but that's how I would describe it. A significant moment as a teenager, slow change and then really big, powerful kinds of changes in my faith and my walk as a young adult at FSU.
What do you remember in college being the biggest catalyst or things that really helped you grow most helpfully?
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know that I had ever really been exposed to like ongoing teaching of the gospel in the way that I was there. I got a sermon, very brief sermons that I recall. It didn't really feel very important. Somehow I wasn't, it was, I didn't see just how important the gospel was. But when I was on campus at FSU, we were doing Bible study. I was learning worship songs. I would say it was about that environment. There was something pretty special about being around a group of young adults who are excited about Jesus. And so I think it was that environment. I mean, when your aunt is your Sunday school teacher and your neighbor is the piano player at church, it didn't feel the same. Something unique and beautiful about my experience at university.
So a big part of being a Christian is stepping out of your comfort zone. That's a big part of living the faith out. And that's a lot of what you do when you go to college. Like you came from a small town, you mentioned you'd never seen a bus before in kind of the pre-show. Tell me about a time when you did something uncomfortable for Christ and kind of how it turned out.
Yeah, so I guess it's easier for me to think about when I did something uncomfortable and then Christ revealed himself to me rather than me thinking about doing it for Christ. But Florida State was 2 hours away from home. That was a big leap. Spent time there. But then I was excited about graduate school. And I had an opportunity to go all the way out to University of Texas at Austin. So I started as a Seminole fan. That's my first allegiance. But my second allegiance is to the Longhorns. But you'll see me repping my University of South Florida Bulls shirt. I'm almost reluctant to talk about being a fan of other teams except the Bulls when I'm with But so going out to Texas was a very, very scary thing to do. It was exciting, but given my background, it seemed like too large of a leap. But I had the opportunity there. A true giant in my discipline, Jack Wilmore, was a faculty member there. He was my master's mentor, and I got to learn under him for my master's degree. But he also held a Bible study for faculty and students, and I got to be a part of that.
Epic.
It was beautiful.
Faculty and students together?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I have the privilege of doing kind of replicating some of that now, which has been great too.
Really?
But, being mentored by him, he's passed away, but I still talk to his beautiful wife from time to time. But then my PhD mentor there, because I kind of shifted more from physiology into more behavior and psychology between my master's and my PhD, and have a wonderful friendship and mentorship with him. Just talk to him all the time, and so I can now see what God was doing. But what that also meant is that I left behind my family, my friends, and the woman that I loved, who's now my wife. But I had to leave all of that behind, and it was difficult, but it was also clarifying in terms of what I wanted for my life with Holly, my wife. And it also helped me see a path for me to become a professor. I think initially when I went out to graduate school, my undergrad degree is in nutrition. I was studying exercise physiology as a master's student. All of this is related, but they're slightly different. I wanted to be a sports nutritionist, like an RD type physiology professional working with professional athletes. But being around higher education, undergrad into the master's program, decided that I really could see myself being a professor. And that leap of faith turned out to be a very beautiful decision. It clarified things with my knowing that I wanted to be with my wife, my now wife, and it also helped make a really clear path for me in terms of a professional pursuit.
It's probably hard to imagine if you hadn't done that, what your life would have been like.
Yeah.
You hadn't gone up to
It
Texas.
is interesting to think about a parallel universe. I'm sure God could have used, no matter what the circumstance would have been, so pleased and so thankful for the way it all transpired, for sure.
Yeah. I think about that first part of John where he talks about being pruned. I'm the vine, you're the branches. And pruning is, for the vine, probably a painful process. It's probably pretty painful to let your wife go. But look at what Christ does. He brings you together with these two guys who became huge in your life. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure.
Fruit. That sounds fruitful.
It does. Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed as you've talked, you've underscored the importance of relationships several times. That's the other thing I'm taking away. Just how critical it is to have these quality relationships in your life as you go. What advice would you have for students? This is off the cuff, I realize. Trying to form those relationships like you've had, these formative relationships.
Yeah. And I think probably if we want to use stereotypes, like most men, I think women tend to have a larger network of friends and men tend to have a smaller network. And so I don't want to pretend that my network is particularly large. It's small, but I guess I'm drawn to the idea of vulnerability, sharing the deepest parts of who we are with people, letting them see who we really are. And those who really love you will really love you no matter what they see. When they see that less desirable side of who we are, if they continue to show love and generosity towards you. And so there's a vulnerability, a risk when we do that. And sometimes it doesn't maybe work out. And those relationships aren't the ones that last, but the ones that do last in response to all that vulnerability are the ones that you can count on for a lifetime.
So I can't imagine something that would be more endearing for a college student than having a professor who put their guard down and shared anything of transparency or vulnerability. How are you able to do that, if at all, with your college students? And even how does that relate to your faith? How much you're able to share about your faith in Christ with your students?
Yeah, so I think there are opportunities when one of the classes I teach, the primary class I teach for undergraduates, is an exercise psychology course. And so we might be talking about body image. We might be talking about self-esteem and how exercise can be related to that. And so there's opportunities, just like every person alive, I think, except for the rare person or the liar who would say that they feel great about every aspect of themselves and their mind, their body, and their appearance. There's ways for me to describe some of my insecurities within that context.
Really?
And one thing I do at the beginning of each class, and I've done this as long as I can remember for sure, but I will do this kind of a Meet the Prof kind of a thing where I say, hey, here's who I am. And I will show them that I come from this really small town, and I'll talk about where I've been trained, and I'll have a photo of my family and my dog and those kinds of things. But as a part of all that, I indicate to them that I'm a believer. I just say, this is an important part of who I am. And I would say something like, you probably won't hear me talk about being a Christian in any significant way the entire rest of this semester. But know that as best I am able, I'm trying to leverage who I am as a follower of Christ with how I'm going to treat you. I'm going to try to be as fair as possible. I'm going to try to be as generous as possible within the confines of having an organized, good course that has accountability. But I'll make that sort of a pronouncement at the beginning of class. But then there will be opportunities to sprinkle out into the semester where I can say, hey, this is an insecurity that I would have had about my body, about my mind, about my relationships, and how that might affect my mental health. And it was really, really cool. Just last year, I had a student, when we were talking about how exercise can positively impact stress and depression and anxiety, he came to me after class and had an opportunity to let him know that I would be praying for him, and had directed him to some services on campus to kind of help him deal with some mental health challenges. And so it's not at all the case that it's every semester that I have a student come to me and say, hey, thank you for what you've said and what you've done. But when it happens, it's really cool. And I feel good about the obedience that comes with that. But maybe as an encouragement to other like faculty members, I would say it is at least somewhat common that when there are believing students in the classroom, I do make them aware of a Bible study that I'm a part of. And so I'll let them know about that, like a campus, kind of an exercise science centric Bible study for faculty and students. And once in a while, there will be another student that will say, wow, thank you for letting me know that you're a Christian. You get the whole idea of, I didn't realize that faculty were Christian and that sort of thing. So I think I have an opportunity to provide some vulnerability, to discuss my vulnerabilities, my insecurities, and then that can reap a small harvest of students that will want to come back and kind of talk more about those things.
Marcus, tell us about that Bible study that has faculty and students in it. How's that organized? How's that run? There's two different worlds coming together.
Yeah, it's really great. Like I said, my mentoring professor at master's program, that's where I got this idea of sorts. It took me a long time to maybe fully realize it. Certainly during the pursuit of tenure promotion, I had some concerns about how much I could put myself out there as a believer. I probably always did that pronouncement in class, but was maybe reluctant, maybe even fearful to do a lot more. But in the last many years, we just come together. We have a conference room. It might be as little as 3 or 4 people. It might be 6 or 8 or 10 people. I do a little bit of preparation, but it's not a really heavy teaching time at all. But there are graduate students occasionally, undergraduate students, and 2 or 3 faculty members. And it's been really great organizing the time for that this fall. Right now, we think we have a good time for it. And so
it's amazing.
I think back to my master's mentor, Jack Wilmore, and the inspiration that he provided for that, which is a great way for me to honor his investment in me.
It seems like to me there are more self-image issues with kids today, with students, from middle school on up to college students. Seems to me it's linked to some social media stuff where you've kind of always got to be on your best behavior because some picture of you is going to get posted up to wherever. And when I went to school, I wore stained shirts and a baseball hat every day because I didn't do laundry, right? And that's how boys are old. You've been teaching long enough to see some changes. Like, how are things changing with our student population right now? And maybe even if you can think of it, like what advice would you have to students on how to deal with it? The changes as far as self-image goes and those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's a bit of almost an odd contradiction in terms of, I know that there's that struggle, but there's also what I've observed, which is students will come to class dressed in all sorts of ways. And oftentimes looking their very, very worst of sorts. And yet you can get a real strong sense when we have these conversations that it resonates with them, that it's a point of struggle. And we have sometimes, not always, and it really depends on the dynamics of the room and the situation, but we can have some really, really rich conversations about that. In my situation, I would say I have, another way that I manage that, which is I look to the God who created me, and all of the attributes that I have, physical or otherwise, are things that God saw fit for it to be how he wanted me to be. But certainly, and I'm not super familiar with all the research, but you're for sure on it in terms of the pressures that students have. So I don't see it in my classroom, but you will certainly see, like when we have students, if I have a student that wants to be on my research team or a student that's applying for a job, the due diligence on my part, without being inappropriate in any way, is I'm going to Google search these students to see who they are and what they're all about. And what we will see online versus what I might see in person is very different. And so it's almost as if students are living two different lives. There's their real life, and then there's this very artificial life. And so I don't know what that's like, but I imagine it creates a lot of difficulty and conflict and contradiction of who I really am and who I want to portray. And I think the research is abundantly clear that there's a mental health crisis that's associated with the younger generations now. And maybe they're just more willing to talk more about it than people of our generation, and that's got to be part of it.
Yeah.
But there's something about the culture, something about media. And if you were to have an expert on here, they could talk more about those details. But it's certainly the case that those types of things are exacerbating problems. I mean, it's probably undeniable that the advent of social media is worse for the mental health of young people. I think that's been documented.
I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but I'm pretty excited. We have a question from a USF student. And I'm excited about this because not only is this a student you may run into at some point, you may already know the student, I doubt it. But this is someone that my son Blake and I know. We've been on a mission trip with this student. Elena is her name. And we've been on 2 trips with her with crew overseas. So take a listen to Elena's question here.
Hello, my name is Elena, and I'm a graduate student at the University of South Florida. And my question for our professor is, how can I practically incorporate the gospel into my conversations with my professor and my peers?
Thanks, Elena, for that great question. I suppose the answer that I would offer in terms of how you might approach that is that if the core of who you are relates to Jesus, if who you say you are as an individual is you are a Christ follower, my encouragement to you would be to just tell people about what's important to you, to let them know that in your mornings, in your midday, in your afternoon, in your evening, what are the things that you're doing? How are you handling yourself? When you encounter a difficult situation, how do you respond to that? And so simply be authentic about who you are and how you approach everyday circumstances and how it is that God helps you. And there's a place for being vulnerable about how you may struggle and how you need to lean into God to help you deal with those challenges. And so I hope that helps.
That's helpful to me, Marcus.
That's
Thank
really
you.
well said.
And
we don't think twice. If you're a big sports fan, that eventually comes up. Mm-hmm. So if you're a big Christ fan, it seems like it would naturally come up at some point. Mm-hmm. I love the way you set that up. That was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. You remember how Heather Holleman would naturally just talk with people about what she's learning in the Bible, what she's struggling with. So she's the very first interview we did at Penn State. So thank you. That's helpful.
Great. Sure.
Let's do lightning round.
Yeah, we got some quick questions for you now. So, Marcus, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self if you could go back in time?
Slow down. Don't be in a rush to get to the next stage of life. The next stage of life will come, but enjoy the stage that you're in. Even if it's difficult, try to find the enjoyable parts of it and embrace the challenge of what that stage of life is all about. So it can inform how to manage all that comes next.
Excellent. Great answer. So what is the main thing you would want graduating seniors to know before they go out in the world? What's your advice?
Yeah, I think I would encourage this, whether this is a high school senior or a college senior, is you don't have to have it all figured out. And it seems like maybe culture, maybe parents sometimes, maybe the world puts a lot of pressure on us to have everything figured out about what we're going to do in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now. And a lot of things can change. And so don't worry about the distant future. Worry about the near-term future. And even with the word worry, we should back off the word worry. Just enjoy the moment. Let the burdens of the future come in the future. Just take on the day and take on the near term and allow whatever the long-term future is going to be, allow that to just come to you rather than worrying about what you should be doing today for tomorrow.
So, Marcus, what advice would you give to other Christian professors, especially who would want to have an influence for Christ on campus, but maybe are afraid of any pushback?
Yeah, I guess it's hard to tell someone who's afraid to not be afraid. But that would be how I think I would encourage folks, is that my experience at a large state university, certainly there is some amount of reluctance on the part of other faculty and maybe administration to really be out in front of promoting like any sort of faith perspective. But my experience has been much better than what my fear was. I think I feared that I would be attacked and that folks would come after me. And my experience has not been like that. And so I guess my starting point would be to don't be afraid, and go to the Lord and ask God to give you wisdom and just give you one step, whatever that step might be. And I know that through Crew and Faculty Commons, there's a lot of great resources, and I've been encouraged. Help me remember the name of Heather Holloman's book that she wrote.
Yeah, she has several. One of them is Sent. Another is
the prior book that she wrote that gave lots of ideas for faculty members is
A Grander Story. She wrote with
A Grander
Rick Hope.
Story.
Yeah.
So there were so many beautiful examples in that very small, very readable book that provides real practical, tangible ways that any faculty member, any staff member on a campus that wants to honor God, there are ways to do that are pretty easy.
So what would you say to the mom or dad who's getting ready to send their high school senior to college at this big, scary state university?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too far removed from that. I have a 22-year-old and a 24-year-old. So we've done that 4 and 6 years ago.
Okay.
And I think ultimately it would be, if you're a Christian parent and you have a Christian child, is to trust the investment that you've made over the prior 18 years, not trusting it that there are any guarantees about what the future may hold, but trust that God has led you and your child to this point. And so trust the work that you've done. And then, of course, no Christian parent needs to be reminded to pray for their kids, but I'd say pray for your children. But pray for the folks that they will interact with. Pray that they will find community. Pray that they will have roommates that are going to be a source of encouragement rather than discouragement.
That's great.
Somewhere a long time ago, I remember being encouraged for me when my children were young to pray for their future spouses, which is an odd thing to do when you have a 10-year-old. But if you're a parent, even now, or if you have a child that's going to be going off to school soon, you can pray in advance, days, weeks, months, or even years in advance, that they will meet professors, they'll meet other students, that they will get invited to a campus ministry function or to a church. So I'm a slow learner. I'm slowly learning that prayer is really, really powerful. And so to encourage parents to pray in all sorts of ways for their kids and for those that the individuals their kids will interact with.
Great. Thank you.
Marcus, one of the hopes we have for Christian college students is that when they're coming to graduate and they want to find a career where they can glorify God the most, our hope is that they would see that doesn't have to be being a pastor, being a missionary, working for a Christian nonprofit, but they can glorify God in almost any field. So how do you see God glorified in your research, in your career, in a way that really can help people learn more about God and even worship Him more?
Yeah, so God has called many people, but we might say a select number of people, to full-time vocational ministry. But God calls many more people, all of His people, to a lifetime of service in other vocations where we can glorify and honor God. And so it was my master's mentor who very plainly taught me the idea that I glorify God through the excellence of my work. And so being excellent in what we do honors God. And so we can glorify and honor God through our work by the quality of the work that we do, but by the way that we interact with and impact the people around us, the relationships that we build. And so, yeah, I'm increasingly compelled that the world needs lots of great pastors and lots of great full-time ministry folks. But what the world needs even more, in some ways, not to diminish the role of professional ministry, what the world needs is just believers of all stripes to honor God with everyday living, vocationally, in our neighborhoods, and all the places that we have influence.
You do have a great platform for the gospel. Thank you for standing in that gap.
Yeah,
You do a lot of good.
It's a privilege to have to do the work that I do. It's not lost on me that how great of a opportunity I have, and so I imperfectly hope that I'm able to honor God through what I do.
Yeah. Well, it's such a privilege for Spence and I to get to know you. We are so grateful for you taking this time out to be with us, you being open and being transparent. You are an example of vulnerability that I think we all need. I think that's something that students especially will be drawn to. And so thank you so much for being available to students the way you are.
Very, very good. So glad to be a part of this. Thank you.
That was an amazing conversation with Marcus Kilpatrick. So many good points came out of that. And I think I'm especially just encouraged with the importance of vulnerability in building relationships. And so please don't forget to like or subscribe or follow to the podcast now. Share it with someone you think it might help. And then I have a few specific challenges. One, if you're a college student, would you consider finding us on Instagram and sending us a question you would have for Christian professors? Maybe we can use it on the show. If you're a college professor, would you go and find us on meettheprof.com and consider sharing some there of how you've come to know Jesus, what your relationship's like with Jesus? Maybe we can publish that for people to see as well. And lastly, if you'd be interested in financially supporting our ministry, we would love that. And you can find out more and give online at give.crew.org/0424344. Thank you so much again for listening, for being a part of this with us. And just like last week, our challenge for you is to initiate at least one Christ-centered conversation on the college campus.